today we're going to be wrapping up the course. Today the focus is to discuss the last step, or well, I guess the third part of the three-part series, which is basically themed around building product. So today we're going to be doing a quick recap of the last class. We're going to be talking about, how to conceptualize the solution with prototypes. We'll talk about metrics for product managers. We're going to talk about project management for product managers. We're going to talk a little bit about technology for product managers and why that's important. And then finally, we're going to wrap up the course. So just a quick recap. We talked about introduction to product management. We gave a quick overview of that. Just 1 second. Yeah, so we will give a quick overview of what product management is all about, why we do lean product management. We talked about how to find and define user problems. We also talked about user research in the last class. And then we also talked about MVP and how MVPs are generally, experiment-based. So the idea is of running the MVP is we want to understand whether or not these products that we are trying to build, people will actually be willing to actually pay money potentially, or whatever it is the goal is for this product that we're trying to build. So we run MVP experiments to de-risk the product development process, which is using the lean product management paradigm. We don't want to waste money. We don't want to waste resources on things that people actually don't want. So we run MVP experiments to test some of our assumptions and de-risk the project. If our MVP experiment passes, then we know that we're good to go. We can continue with the development. If it doesn't pass, then maybe we need to reconsider a few things about the product development. So at the end of the last class, I basically mentioned I'm working on a project as well. Hopefully others in this course are working on the project, on their own projects. But basically, I was able to design develop my MVP experiment, whereby I designed the learning objective for the Microsoft Learn module that I wanted to share to solve the customer problem, right? So I decided that in order to determine whether or not this is a useful feature for our product, we wanted to run the experiments by creating a sign-up form that has information. 1 second. So that has information about what we're going to be teaching in this course. We also talked about the duration of the course, right? So basically, when the cloud solutions architects that work on this AKS product with the customers, when they're able to see the sign-up form and they see what we're trying to do, the objective of this course, which in our case is a feature for the Azure Policies for AKS, then if it's useful, they would sign up to this form. If it's not useful, then maybe they wouldn't sign up for this form, which means that maybe we shouldn't be spending too much time developing this feature. So basically, this is a very, very easy experiment. I basically created a web form where people can actually just log in. You can just put in your name, the name of your customer. It didn't take me more than 30 minutes to develop this MVP experiment. Most of the time was actually developing this part, which is basically defining the objective. And then we also had minimum criteria for success, which was basically if we had at least 50 CSA sign up to it, then we know we're good. If we don't have up to 50 CSA, then maybe we need to reconsider. Oops. Okay, so now I'm going to be demoing the results of my MVP experiment, just to show everyone what that looks like. Let's see. I hope you're all excited to see what the result was. Were we able to get 50 CSAs? That's a big question. Okay, so let's see. All right. Are you ready? Are you ready for this? All right.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so this is the result of the experiment. Basically, we were able to get 57 respondents in this particular scenario. So 57 people actually signed up to this course. Basically, these are the latest responses. We have, it looks like most of the responders are actually CSAs, which is great. We also have some customer engineers who sign up as well, and people who are neither of these two. So now we know, obviously the target audience is definitely, these are the two main target audience, and most of them, most of the respondents were actually within that target audience. We also had some of the customer names, so I'm actually able to see, who are the different customers that are actually, our CSA community feel are interested in this course. So if they're able to show specific customers who might need it, then chances are that this feature is probably useful. If they can't think of customers who need this feature, then maybe we're not making something that will be useful for the customers. So in this case, we can say that the MVP experiment was successful. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next topic, which is basically, I just want to show you, because I'm going to be using the Microsoft Learn as an example for some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. So I just want to show you what Microsoft Learn actually looks like. Just so you have a little bit of context and see, understand some of the things that we're trying to do. Okay, so let's see this. Okay. Okay, so share my screen. Oops, wrong screen. Okay, so basically, you can go on Google right now if you want to. Here, you can just go on Google and type Microsoft Learn, and basically you would see, this website, which is basically where the Microsoft Learn modules are. And here you can actually learn lots of really, really cool stuff that, can help you be successful. For example, you can type SQL. I think someone said something about the SQL module coming up. So you can actually learn, about introduction to, different things about SQL. Within here, you can also use filters to see, okay, so I only care about, let's say, let's try this. Azure courses only, right? So you can actually refine your search. But anyways, we're not, I just wanted to give an example of what the Microsoft Learn looks like. So this is a course that I'm looking for. This is not my course. This is another person's course. Obviously, I haven't completed developing my course yet because we just got some results. But here we can actually see what the Microsoft Learn that I've been talking about looks like. So this is an example of a course. So here you have the name of the course. You have some learning objectives. So in my MVP experiment, I showed you the learning objective, which was this, right? I want to, by the end of this, the customer should be able to understand how to use Azure Policies and blah, blah, blah. So over here, you can actually see for this course, this was, their learning objective, right? And then here you can actually see the prerequisites, and you can see, some of the, funny enough, the example I wanted to use is actually relational database, and you're going to be learning that hopefully next week. So looks like I picked a really good example, but basically the way it works is you have an introduction, right? And then basically it gives you a scenario. So imagine you are a developer for a large supermarket chain in Consulto, right? So it basically gives you a scenario, right? And then it tells you by the end of this, you should be able to do this, right? And then you go through the different, items. So SQL stands for Structured Query Language. And then it actually goes just explains what the whole concept is about. So here you can actually learn some things about, how to write SQL queries and stuff like that. And then next, so you just keep going. You also have things like, you have screenshots. Basically, it's showing you how certain things are done. And then here you can actually see an example of an exercise, right? So in the exercises, they actually provide you with a place where you can actually, have an environment where you can actually test out and follow along, right? So here they're talking about consultants provided a SQL database that has imported all that information. And then it basically tells you the same time database is provisioned and populated is running the script. So they actually run the scripts to provision the database for you. And then all you have to do is follow these instructions, right? So when in the as we go down this lecture today, I would actually talk about exercises, right? The idea is, you can actually activate this free environment where you can actually try it out yourself. And then within that environment, you can actually run this code yourself, right? So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that all these instructions, copy this, paste this, all these instructions are quite straightforward and quite easy so that people are not able to finish the instruction, because if your instruction is not good enough, then maybe people will get confused and they wouldn't be able to finish it, right? So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that. But I just wanted to show you an example of what this Microsoft Learn module that I've been talking about. I just wanted to show you what it looks like. Okay, so going back to the slides. Okay, so we just that's the course that I just demoed. So now that our experiment was successful, at least the initial experiment, to have a quick feedback to understand whether or not this is even something we should be looking at. Again, it took me just a few minutes to develop it. I didn't spend weeks of engineering time developing this course and then find out that it's completely useless, right? And that's basically what lean product development is about. So we're going to be, let me just open this up. Okay. So basically, now that we have that, what is the next step? What is the next thing we want to do? Again, we want to continue with the lean product development process, right? We want to continue to get feedback and make sure that we're actually developing and the first thing, right? So now I'm going to be talking about some of the prototyping methods, right? So the first one I'm going to be talking about is wireframing. So wireframing is basically the first step towards taking something that was in your head, right? You have a conceptual idea and turning it into something that's definite and precise, some kind of rough translation of the product idea into something that you can actually show, right? So it's basically low fidelity, which pretty much means that, it's low accuracy. And by low accuracy, it means that how close this wireframe or this thing looks to what the final product will look like is very low, right? So when you hear in product management low fidelity, in this case, it just means that how close is that thing, that prototype or whatever it is, to the actual finished product. So wireframes are actually quite low fidelity, but they allow us to collect feedback, and user research, right? Because if you have something physical, you're not just presenting an idea to your customers, you actually have something that you can show them, right? That they can then use to decide whether or not this is actually useful for them. So it's actually, it's an iterative process, right? So for example, you could have the first one, which is like the first version might just be something really, really simple. And then the next one, it could just be, so when I say simple, it can actually be as simple as someone drawing something on a piece of paper and taking a picture of it and then showing that to customers that, oh, you know what, this is actually what it looks like, right? So you have a picture, you have something that kind of looks like the final product, but not really. You can actually get rapid feedback. You can be like, oh, you know what, like this doesn't really make sense, right? So also, sometimes you can just put text, like sample text. There's this really common sample text paradigm that we use in product development, whereby when you're trying to make this mock-up, you don't actually have to write the actual text that will be on the website. You can use this thing called Lorem Ipsum. Basically, it's spelled Lorem Ipsum, Ipsum, and basically Google it. You get some text from the internet. And you can just put that on your mockup, and then you can use that to show without having to spend time actually typing out actual things that will actually be in the final website, right? So in a small company, the PM might actually do the wireframing themselves, right? Because they're leading the team. Maybe they don't have a UX designer assigned at that time yet, so they might actually have to do it themselves. But in a bigger company, for example, or if it's a product that has lots of funding, then you may need to have some designer to actually help you make the mockup. So for this reason, it's quite important for product managers. Even though you're not a designer, it's quite important for product managers to learn or to have some ideas of what wireframing actually looks like. Right. So basically, you don't have to be an expert. Sometimes you might just want to sketch something up really quickly, and but the whole concept is you want to be able to communicate complex concepts, and wireframe actually help you do that. Okay, so in this case, again, let me just show you what my mockup actually, sorry, my wireframe actually looks like. Okay, so since I was actually able to get some feedback and my experiment was successful, I was able to, what is this? I was able to reach my, I was able to reach my minimum criteria for success. I then went on and created this wireframe. So there's different ways you can have wireframes. I'm going to show another example in a second. But in this particular example, this is what my wireframe looks like. You can obviously continue to refine this to make it look a little bit more like the product. But basically here, I have who are the roles, who are the people who would be interested in this course, right? So for example, you have DevOps engineer might be interested in this. You might have, administrator, the IT administrator might be interested in this course. The solution architect might be interested. What level is this, right? So this is not a beginner type course. It's an intermediate course, right? So these are the products that actually use this that this Microsoft Learn module relates to. And so you have the AKS that I mentioned before, which is my main product, Azure Kubernetes Service, and then we also have Azure Policies, right? So we just have some prerequisite, what the person would need to be able to take the course. The summary, again, what we expect the person to learn. You have the learning objectives. You want to have a little subset. You want to make sure that these little things actually fulfill some of the objectives, right? So there's 2 learning objectives. So this is the first one. So this subtask would actually fulfill this first one, and this one will fulfill the second one, which is what this number 2 is. You have the units, right? So we're going to have an introduction, just like we had in the other course, right? So we had an introduction. We had an introduction here, right? So so here we're going to have like just an idea of what the introduction would look like. Then we're going to have, these are basically the units that we're going to have, right? So we have 7 units in this course. This one we're going to have, so this is the first one, second one. This is what's going to be in the second unit. The third one, it's going to be an exercise, right? So here is an example of what an exercise looks like. So exercise enable Azure Policy for AKS. Here we have, this is another unit, and then this is another one, and so on, right? So basically, by creating this mockup, right, we were actually able to show some customers, right, or whoever the end user might be, some ideas of what the finished product will look like. Obviously, like I said, it's low fidelity. It looks nothing like this website. It's not the same layout. It's just a quick, intro to what it would look like. You can actually show that to your customers and be like, oh, this is what we're trying to build. These are what the topics are going to look like. And then hopefully with that, they would actually be able to give you some feedback. And then maybe now you can decide, oh, you know what, these 8 modules is not enough. We also need another module. Maybe we need to have another exercise in there somewhere, right? So by being able to, sorry, Olayemi, do you mind muting yourself? Thank you. Yeah, so basically, if you're able to use the wireframe, you would actually be able to get some really, really rapid feedback without spending too much time, on this product that actually might not be successful. Okay, so we talked about that. I'm gonna go ahead back to the slide. Okay, so what is a wireframe? So basically, these are some of the wireframe tools we can use, right? So again, like I said, it's very low fidelity. It's basically just a blueprint for your design, which is basically what that previous one would actually look like. So here are some of the tools that you can use for wireframing, right? So you can use, in my case, I just used Typora because it's a course. So I basically just use this Typora thing to just show an outline of what the course would look like, right? But if you're making a website, you probably want something more visual, right? So you can use something like Balsamic, which is popular for low fidelity wireframes because it's very, very quick to sketch wireframes using Balsamic. And it's actually kind of fun to play with. Another one is Azure. It's not Azure, not Microsoft Azure. It's a different product. Azure. And basically, it's actually a pretty big application that you need to install on your computer, and it's used by enterprises. It allows teams to collaborate and has lots of features baked into it. Another one is Hot Glue, which is basically browser-based, right? Only so you can actually store data on your computer. Instead of storing all the data on your computer, you're basically storing, on the browser, basically on Hot Glue's servers, right? So they're actually saving that information for you. So basically, if you want to travel somewhere and you didn't have your computer with you, you can still access your designs because it's just a browser, right? You just need to sign in. It's also great for collaboration because you can have other people actually sign in. You can actually add other people to your files so that you can then have access to it. Also, another one, really popular one is Pop, which is actually really, really popular because it allows you to take the sketches you have and turn them into digital copies that you can manipulate. So next, we're going to be talking about mockup, right? So how is a mockup different from a wireframe? Basically, a mockup is a static display of what the final product will look like. So remember previously I said that the wireframe is low fidelity, right? Clearly, this is not anything like what our course would look like, right? It's just something to help. Oops, sorry. Okay, so yeah, so basically it's what a mockup is basically what the final product will look like. It's not just a wireframe. So basically it helps you make a decision on if you're able to design what the product will look like. You can actually get feedback from the customers, right? Or you can get feedback from the rest of your development team, right? You can show them this is the typography we're going to be using. This is the type of colors. This is exactly what the website will look like. Obviously, it's not the actual website. It's just what it looks like. We can use tools like for Photoshop, which is incredibly powerful. Everyone knows about Photoshop, although it's a little bit clunky, for making mockups quickly. It's pixel based. So, for example, if you want to stretch, the images within the Photoshop canvas, it would actually, it will look pixelated. Another really pretty good one is Sketchup, which allows you to create mockups a little bit faster than for Photoshop. Is a little bit easier to use. Then we also have Illustrator. Basically makes design based on vector, right? So the previous one was pixels, which means that when you stretch it, it actually looks pixelated. But when you're using vectors, basically the different points are held in space only relative to other points of the design. It's basically meaning that it's a vector. And this means that when you stretch it, it redefines the image for the new size and isn't pixelated. So because it's only concerned with the relative position of the different points as opposed to the absolute location of the various points, like in the case of Photoshop. Axure is also really good for mockups, and Figma is another really good one. So for Figma, I think is a little bit newer than some of these other tools, and I'm actually going to demo what the Figma mockups look like. But the very basically the mockup, the main goal of the mockup is to handle visuals, right? It just shows you what your product would actually look like. While the wireframe basically handles the structure, like I showed you previously in my example. This is just the structure of what the course would look like. Okay, so now I'm going to be showing you what Figma looks like. Basically, I co-founded a non-profit organization called Black Mint. I co-founded an organization called Black Mint, and basically within Black Mint, we are trying to, give middle and high school students right now in Canada an opportunity to get resources that would actually be valuable for them. And the goal basically is to increase the proportion of tech professionals that are Black by basically going to the grassroots and helping train these students from a pretty young age. So some of the things that we do is we have events where students can actually come in and actually learn about different areas of tech, hopefully get inspired. We have our Rising Star platform, which I'm about to show you. Basically, it's an online resource. It's a web application where they can actually sign in and they can actually consume content where they can learn about tech, help them make informed decisions on which courses they need to take to, potentially get into tech university degrees. We also have a podcast on there. So basically, there's other things that Black Mint does, but the most important one right now for the case of this course is the Rising Star platform, basically. This is an example of what a mockup looks like. So again, I'm using Figma. It's browser-based, which means that I don't have to install any software on my computer. I can basically log into another computer and actually, do some work on this, right? So this is basically what a mockup looks like. Sorry, just having a little bit of trouble zooming properly, but basically you can see here, oops. Okay, yeah, so hopefully here you can see, this is the website. This is actually the website. You can actually go on the website right now and you can see it's actually live. It's risingstar.blackmint.io. So basically this is kind of a mock-up of what our landing page looks like, right? So if you actually go on the website, you'll actually see this is what the landing page looks like. And when you log in, this is basically what it would look like. So this is, the student, and basically the student can actually complete tasks and actually get points. So basically this person has 20 points at this point. And this is an example of our podcast, right? So this is me smiling, as you can see here. This is my partner, who's also the co-host of our podcast. We also have information about different careers on our website, and tech programs, all that kind of stuff. So basically, this is an example of what a mockup looks like, right? A mockup basically is what the final product will look like, and it basically helps you, communicate with the developers that this is what we want it to look like. You can get early feedback, without actually spending time developing the website, right? So what do I want to do next? Yeah, so that is basically what a mockup looks like. So let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so that was a Figma demo. Okay, so prototypes. What are prototypes?
You move on. I want to comment that I really love what you're doing there. I'm wondering whether there is some sort of collaboration that we could do with our STEMing program, because we have kids, and we don't just do coding and whatnot, right, for the kids. So there are other areas that we do, but I feel like there could be some way where we can collaborate with your team on this.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes, I would definitely love that. Obviously we can discuss that offsite. Sorry, offline. But yes, definitely. Looking forward to that.
Good,
We're
thanks.
actually really excited. We're launching our Rising Star program today, which is really big. We got lots of, some funding from RBC. Basically, they gave us some money to develop this 1-year program for students, where they will actually, at the end of this program, they'll have lots of information, lots of knowledge about the tech industry, because each class, which is the whole program is 9 months long, and each month you have a different topic, and at the end they actually develop a product or some kind of solution that would help their community. And that program is actually starting right now. So really excited about that. So anyways, thank you. So back to what we were discussing. Basically, we have prototypes. So what are prototypes, right? So basically, a prototype is you can say it's a first phase where you can actually play with what you've created, right? So with a mock-up, you can see what it looks like, but you probably can't really play with it, right? So with the prototypes, you can actually go ahead and actually, you have something where you can actually click on stuff and actually see what happens, right? So it's really, really important and really, really good for usability testing, because, like if you want to show the customer, um, what the flow would look like, right? And you can actually get feedback without actually building the full product, right? You can actually show them this is what the flow would look like, or they can actually test it themselves without actually making the full website. And then, so this is basically what people think of when they think about MVPs. You want to make something really small and actually, get people to test it and get feedback. So you can actually see how the MVP serves a little bit of a different purpose than a prototype, right? But at the end of the day, a prototype could actually be an example of an MVP, right? Because you want to run an experiment, whether or not the hypothesis could be, if we were to have the website this way, users would actually be able to get to this feature. Users would actually be able to find this feature, or users will be able to, take advantage or use the flow that you expect them to follow to consume this feature, right? So that could be the hypothesis, right? And then you then give it to a customer, and then basically you test your hypothesis and see if the customer can actually figure out how to use that feature or how to use that product, right? So prototypes could be an example of an MVP, and basically it's really, really good for feedbacks, and basically helps you decide what works best, right? So for example, you can actually do A/B testing, where you would have different versions of it and actually see which version actually helped the customer be, or the person, the user, more successful. So some of the tools that you can use for that include Pub. I've already talked about Pub before. Azure Proproto.io is a really good one as well. Basically, you can use it to make a rapid prototype. You can use Envision, right? So I'm going to be showing Envision a little bit today. You can also use Figma, which I'm also going to be showing, and then you have Expo. So Expo is actually really, really good. You can use Expo to test Android applications without actually, building the whole application and hosting it on the Google Play Store, right? You can actually use Expo to host your mobile Android application, and you can actually test it. You can actually give it to customers and be like, okay, to log on to Expo, I've actually given you access to this application. Within Expo, you actually see what the application looks like, and the customer can actually test it out as well. So basically, prototypes handle usability, right? So we say mockup handles the visuals, prototypes handle usability. So hopefully everyone understands what the difference is between prototypes and mockups. So I just want to show you real quick. So this is basically what our website looks like right now. But obviously it took us a really, really long time to get here. I mean, we started developing this around, I think, September or October last year. But this is where we are. This was actually the first session that we had. Can you imagine? This is what the original version. No one has. Obviously, we don't show a lot of people this, but you can actually see, some of the things we actually started with. This was a very, very, low fidelity mockup. I'm sorry, wireframe that we created pretty early on. And then we also had like a paper prototype. So let me see if this is working now. I know yesterday, in this website was down. Okay, so it looks like I'm not able to show it, but basically what it was our designer basically sketched what we thought the mobile version of the website. Our website is actually mobile first, right? Because we noticed that doing our user research, we found out that most students don't use laptops to access the internet. They actually use their phones. So our entire website is actually designed first for mobile. So basically, she on the piece of paper actually drew some stuff, and then she then matched it up into using Invis to actually make it more interactive, to make a prototype, so that when you click on those things that she actually drew on a piece of paper, it will actually do something, and then it will actually show the students at the time what the interaction of the application will look like, and actually helped us get some really early feedback. And then we went to the high fidelity screens. And so this was the original version of what the website looked like. Obviously, we made lots of changes since then. But this is kind of how it looked like. Like we had, this was kind of a funny concept we thought of. We ended up not going in that direction. But yeah, so these were like some of the things that we did. And then we had the high fidelity screen. So this is basically much closer to what the website looks like now, right? So like for the different tech degrees, right? This is actually what similar to what the page looks like. So basically, what I'm trying to show here is how you can make a mockup using Figma. Sorry, a prototype using Figma. So basically, you can. So this is basically, what it would look like. So you can actually send this link to our customers, our students, and be like, oh, okay, so try this out. Let's see if you're able to figure out how to use this website. Is it easy for you to use this website? So we click on sign up. Oops. Okay, I guess sign up didn't work. Oh, so you click on this hamburger and you can actually see different things within the page, right? So you go home and this is actually what it looks like. So you can actually get customers, you can actually do some usability testing and actually get them to try it out and see if they're able to figure it out. So for example, here we had, you click here and then you actually see some of the ways you can earn some points, right? So if they click there, then you know that, this thing that you created actually works, right? We didn't want to clog up their screen with all these points if they only care about the content. So they were actually able to hide this task. Right now, we kind of disabled that feature temporarily because we just released the second version, which is looks nicer on a web browser than it did when we first launched. Previously, it looked really nice on the mobile, but didn't look very nice on the browser. So we just launched a new version last weekend. So right now you're not able to hide these, but yeah. So anyways, you can I can actually click here and be like, oh, this is what it looks like when I click on data science. This is what it will look like, right? Oh, you actually have salaries. Awesome. I'm really happy about that, right? This is actually something that I noticed during usability testing that students were so excited to see that, oh, I can actually see how much money I would make, right? Yeah, so that's basically what a prototype could look like, right? So as we evolved over time on developing the application, we then basically, so this is the actual website. Like I said, this is the actual website. And this is basically what it looks like. Again, as you can see, it looks a lot nicer than it did just a week ago on a laptop. So basically, this is what it looks like. This is an actual episode that we created. So, and this is actually one of the co-hosts. It's me and Shrika here, and this is basically our first episode, getting to know Black Mint and the Rising Star podcast. And basically, if you click here, you can actually see Sharika's profile. And if you click here, which is the video itself, you can actually then go to, basically we're hosting this podcast on YouTube, but students can actually interact with us and actually say, oh, hey, they can actually ask questions. See, we've actually been testing this since December last year. And then, description about different episodes. You can also like it and so on, right? You can also see stuff like, different careers. You can check out different careers, different programs. We have a bunch of mentors already signed. So these are actually people who signed up to our platform as mentors. And here you can actually see the tasks that we have. And again, it still looks nice on mobile, right? When you go to mobile view, you can actually see what that looks like. Again, we disabled the feature to make this disappear sometimes if you don't want to see it, because we just released a new feature, the new version, which looks nice on the laptops. So maybe we'll add that back later. But basically, you can see this is how it looks on a mobile phone. So that's just an example of what a high fidelity prototype would look like, right? But it's not really a prototype anymore because it's actually live. You can actually check it out right now. But in the early development, we actually use this as a prototype. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Okay, so do we have any questions? That basically ends the session on conceptualizing the solution. Do we have any questions? Let me see if we have anyone's hands up. I'm not sure if I can see. Sorry. Okay, I don't see anyone's hands up right now. So we will go ahead, and I would assume the silence means that everyone understands what I'm saying. Okay, so let's go back to sharing this.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so next we're going to be talking about metrics. Fun part, introduction to metrics. I hope you're excited. I think metrics are very, very important, right? So as mentioned at the beginning of this class, you understanding data or doing data analysis is extremely important in so many different fields. And one of the fields that really needs to understand data analysis is product management, because you need to be able to understand, what's actually happening with your product, right? If you're not able to analyze data, if you're not able to understand what questions to ask about the performance of your product, how do you know how successful your product is, right? You need to understand data analysis, understand the type of data that your team is collecting. For example, you need to understand, is my team collecting information on how many people are clicking on this button, right? If you added a new feature and you want to know how many people are actually using that feature, you probably want to see how many page views, how many people have actually viewed that page on your website, or how many people have actually clicked on that link to get to that page, right? So we're going to be talking about why metrics are important. We're going to be talking about how you can choose a metric that actually makes sense for your product. We're going to be going over some real-life examples, and then we're going to talk about different frameworks to help you develop your metrics. So basically, what is a metric? It's just really simple. It's just a measurement that tells you something about your product, right? So for example, a metric could be the number of new people who signed to your platform this month, right? I expect that number of people that signed up to my platform would spike this month because we just started the Rising Star program, and we expect that all the students in our program would probably sign up to the platform as well. Also, the mentors will probably sign up. Their mentors will also sign up. So, we expect that, this thing that happened would actually drive some increases in some of our metric, right? There's a very popular saying that goes, what gets measured gets managed, right? So this saying was actually coined by Peter Drucker, who's an old school management consultant leader who basically define a lot of things that management consultants use today. So I would say his opinion really matters. Basically what that means is if you're measuring something, right, you would actually manage that thing. If you don't measure it, if you don't see how you're performing, and then maybe you wouldn't be able to know whether or not this product is being managed properly. But the reason why metrics are so effective is the fact that they basically provide instantaneous feedback, right? So here's an example. Studies have shown that you see these speed signs here. This speed signs here, basically as you're driving around the neighborhood, some neighbors actually have these signs there that when you drive past them, it actually shows you how fast you're going. So you know what the speed limit is, and then you can actually see how fast you're going. It's actually shown that using this is actually more effective than occasionally having cops there to basically see whether or not you're speeding and actually giving you a ticket. And the reason for that is basically because of the concept of the feedback loop, right? You basically get instantaneous feedback. You can actually see at the moment exactly how fast you are going, and you can actually see that is actually being tracked, right? It looks like it's being tracked, even though you might never get a ticket through this speed meter. The fact that you can actually see how fast you're going on the screen, not just your speedometer, but actually show you increase the chance of you basically slowing down, right? So for example, think about the speeding tickets, right? So the only time you get a real feedback is when you actually speed and then you get a ticket, right? But how often does that happen, right? Even the worst driver, is only so many times that you would actually get caught. But with this, you actually get instant feedback on how fast you're actually going at that very moment, which is basically what drives that behavior to help people reduce their speeds. And then when you think about stuff like this, the fitness tracker industry, that's another example of the feedback loop, right? Because if you can actually see using those trackers how many steps you've actually walked in that day, or maybe how fast you ran during that workout, you have instant feedback on how successful you are with your fitness goals, right? So for example, if you decide that you're going to run every morning and you're able to track that you've actually run every morning using that tracker, and you realize that you're still not losing weight, right? Another metric could be your weight, right? You're measuring your weight every day. So you expect that when you run, your weight will actually reduce. But if it's not working, then maybe you need to change something, right? So that's basically where the feedback loop actually goes. So why is this valuable? Obviously, I've mentioned some examples, but it helps products be more successful, right? It's one of the core tenets of lean product management. Like if you are able to get instantaneous feedback, you can actually find out whether or not your product is successful, whether or not this new feature that you're developing is successful really quickly without actually wasting too much time, right? So, but the thing is, you want to be able to, the whole concept of product management as opposed to project management, right? So project management, you're trying to deliver a project within the constraints, right? But with product management, you're basically trying to accomplish a goal, right? But to be able to determine whether or not you're accomplishing that goal, you need to be able to define what is the goal, right? How do you need to define success, right? So you can say that, the goal for this new feature is to increase our users by, 50%, right? When we develop this feature, our users will actually go up by 50%. But if you don't have that defined as a metric, you wouldn't know whether or not you accomplish your goal, right? So metrics are very, very important. So here are some examples of some real life metrics that are used by really popular companies that. So for example, with Twitter, right? They have they have growth metrics, they have engagement metrics. I'll go into what those actually mean a little bit later. But basically, an example of a growth metric for Twitter is total new user per week or per month, right? Depending on how Twitter development team, how they're tracking it. Also, monthly or daily active users, right? They want to see what percentage of the users are actually using Twitter at least once a day or at least once a month, right? So monthly, daily active users is an example of a metric. Another one could be activated users, right? How many users actually, what percentage of the people that went to the Twitter website actually signed up and maybe did something, like, for example, followed someone or, created the first tweet, right? So that's basically what an activated user in the context of Twitter would actually look like. For the engagement metrics, you want to see how engaged, right? How often are actually people actually, using your website. So for example, you want to be able to track stuff like multiple logins per day. How many times are people, opening up the application per day, right? How much time are they spending on the application per day? What is the average number of likes across all the users or users within a certain demographic? You also want to see average number of retweets and follows, so you can see how the social interactions are going on with Twitter, right? And then also, the number of private messages, right? How many people are using Twitter to send themselves private messages, right? So those are some examples of, engagement metrics. But you find one thing you'll notice is that these engagement metrics, they're actually specific to Twitter, right? It wouldn't, obviously number of followers does not really apply to, like Facebook, right? Because Facebook, you're basically adding friends as opposed to followers. I mean, I guess Facebook has some follow feature as well, but I think it's a little bit more important for Twitter. So think about YouTube, right? So those growth metrics that I mentioned before, like for example, number of new users per month, monthly active users, activated users, basically that applies to YouTube as well, and it also applies to Facebook. But their engagement metrics are a little bit different, right? So they want to look at some of the engagement metrics could be like video views, right? And how do you define what a video view is? And for YouTube, at least a few years ago, I'm not sure if that's still the case, but basically, a video view counts when the person has spent at least 30 seconds watching that video, right? So basically, this metric needs to have a criteria. So not just video views, but you need to say video views, or how many people, how many videos in total across YouTube were viewed for at least 30 seconds, right? So this is an indicator of the quality of the use. If someone wants to open the wrong link, we don't want that to count, right? We also want to look at things like average viewing time, right? Because if someone only watches one video and that video is 3 hours long versus another person who watches 20 videos, or like let's say the person watched 5 videos and each video is actually 5 minutes long, right? So that's 25 minutes versus 3 hours. Obviously, the first person is more valuable, right? So that's where a metric like average viewing time actually comes in. So for Facebook, again, this have the same growth metrics, right? How many activated users, how many monthly new users, all that kind of stuff. But their engagement metrics might be a little bit different, right? So for example, position clicks, right? Which is basically the which position did a person engage in their news feed, right? So when you go on Facebook and you have all these different posts from all your friends, what position was the post that the person actually clicked on, right? Basically, they have this ranking, this algorithm that helps, the front end show show all of the news feed, right? So you have the first news feed, you have the second news feed, and you have the third news feed, and so on. Basically, are people clicking on the news feed? Hello, does someone want to mute themselves? Markel? Okay, so basically, for this metric, right, which is basically position clicks, Facebook wants to make sure that they're actually serving you the most relevant information, the most important information to you at the very top, right? Because if you look at the first three newsfeed and none of them is important to you, you're probably going to close the website, right? But they're trying to get you to spend as much time as possible. So basically, if the users are not clicking on maybe the first three posts, they're clicking on stuff further down, it means that, the team that's responsible for developing the algorithm that determines which newsfeed should come first at the very top, that team, maybe they didn't do a very good job. Maybe they need to improve which feed actually goes to the top, right? So that's just an example of, some real life example of metrics that the big companies actually use. So basically, I mentioned already growth metrics and engagement metrics, right? So those are basically two of the types of metrics. Other types of metrics could include retention metrics, user happiness metrics, and also revenue metrics. Okay, so it's 11:22. Okay, so basically, what is growth or activation growth/activation metric? Basically, you want to understand. Basically, you want to understand how your company or product is growing, right? So the growth and activation metric is about basically, are we getting more users? Are we getting more activated users and all that kind of stuff? So these metrics are basically tied around that. So some examples include, total new users per month, right? New users by source, right? So you notice that these metrics, sometimes they're actually ratios or they're actually within a time frame. If you want to say how many users do we have on Facebook in total, right? That metric does not really make sense. But if you want to see how many new users do we have last month, that is actually more sensible because you can actually see the trend of whether or not that number is actually increasing. But sometimes also you want to say number of new users by source, right? So you want to understand not just how many new users, but also which of your promotional effects are actually working, right? So are people coming from Google? Like, are they just searching for your product and they're actually coming from Google? Or are they coming from, clicking a link from your ad campaign to see whether or not your ad campaign is actually, working? Or if most of your users are still coming from Google, right? For example, or maybe there was a blog, maybe someone actually posted a blog about your product, right? Maybe you want to filter out the effect of that blog and see maybe a very, very popular, celebrity actually posted about your product on their blog, and then lots of clicks actually came from that. You can actually see how many people actually came from that. But if you want to see how, filter that out to see what, on a normal day, that growth actually looks like without that blogger, then you can actually filter out that blogger's the ones that came from that blogger's website and actually focus on the rest of it to see organic growth of your platform. Activated users is another big one. So I mentioned that a little bit before. Basically, an activated user is defined as someone that has not only gone to your website, but has also signed up and performed a particular action. For example, like I said, in the case of Twitter, not just the people that have actually downloaded the Twitter app, which would actually be an example of what a new user could be, or someone who has actually signed up to Twitter and actually maybe followed someone just to show that the person actually did something, right? After they signed up. So that's what an activated user would actually be. Retention, basically, obviously retention is tied really, really closely to activation. Basically, you're looking at numbers like who are the people that are using your platform last month? Who used it last month and are using it again, right? So what is your retention, right? So for example, you can say what percentage of the people who used your platform 2 months ago, but they actually didn't use it again this month, right? And now so they used it 2 months ago. They didn't use it last month, but now they use it again this month, right? So that would be an example of a resurrected user, right? So you want to see, how many people who didn't use it last month or who didn't use it last week or whatever the metric is, actually came back, right? And maybe they came back because they saw an email from your company, right? Saying, oh, by the way, we just released this new feature. Maybe you should come back, right? Or maybe it's a push notification that they got on their phone that actually made them to come back, right? So for example, if 100 people signed up last month, right? I'm sorry, 2 months ago, but only 60 people used it last month, then your retention rate is basically 60%, right? Because you know, out of the 100 people that signed up last month, only 60 of them actually came back. So you want to understand why they didn't come back, and maybe they didn't find the product useful. So that's why that could be a very, very important metric for your product, right? If for this example, this month, 40 people, so out of the 100, 40 people didn't come back, right? But this month, all 40 of them actually came back, right? Maybe you released a new feature and then you sent out an email saying you had a new feature, and then they actually came back, all 40 of them. Then in that case, you would say your resurrection rate is 100%, because 40 out of the 40 people who left the platform last month actually came back, right? So we talk about month or week, right? So these time frames are defined by the company. What is important to them? Do they want to track by month, or do they want to track by week, right? So those are some of the flexibilities that you can do with your metric. I also want to introduce a concept of cohort analysis. If you learn a little bit more about data analysis, it's actually one of the ways to understand how users are interacting with your platform, right? So basically, you group users into different cohorts, right? A cohort could be all of the people that signed up to your platform in a month, right? So that's one cohort. So the first cohort of people sign up in January. The second cohort started sign up in February, right? So you can use cohort analysis to actually see how many of those people that started in January actually came back in February and in March, right? And then how many of the ones that started in January but didn't come back in February actually came back in March, right? So cohort analysis actually helps you understand on the cohort level what the performance of your product look like, right? So maybe when your product had these features, these basic features, right? This was the cohort. These were the people that actually use your product. And then, the next month, maybe they didn't use it, or some of them, or low percentage of them actually used it. And then the next month you had another feature, and then some of the people actually came back, right? So basically, you can analyze using the cohorts and do a deeper dive on who is actually using your product, and maybe give you some clues on which features to prioritize on. Okay, so engagement metrics, basically we use that to understand how much are people actually using your platform, right? So they basically talk about like I said before, we talked about YouTube and how the total number of videos watched can be a metric, or the total length of the video watched per user, right? So those are some examples of some engagement metrics. They are tailored to the companies, right? Facebook, maybe they're not as important. Or also Facebook, obviously Facebook has videos, right? But maybe YouTube, a view count when at least 30 seconds of that video has been watched, right? But for Facebook, it could just be 3 seconds, right? Because maybe Facebook videos are much shorter than YouTube videos, or maybe they just they only care about who's actually spent any kind of time watching the videos, right? So different companies have different metrics, or they can actually use the same metric, but the granularity of how they actually use it could actually determine what they're trying to focus on. So in YouTube's case, they probably want to focus on people actually watching as much of the video as possible, because YouTube videos are more informative, I guess. Or on Facebook, they just care about engagement, right? Whether or not people are actually on their website, on the news feed, right? Because they want to know which news feed people actually clicked on. So if the news feed happens to be a video, once they're on that video page for 3 seconds, that's all they care about. User happiness. So basically, User happiness is basically a measure of how happy people are with your product, right? So one of the biggest user happiness scores is actually called the NPS score, which is Net Promoter Score. It's something that was developed a long time ago, and it's pretty, ubiquitous across different companies. So lots of companies actually use the Net Promoter Score. And basically, the way it works is, a survey goes out to users to track how likely they are to recommend the product to other people, right? Which is basically where the promoter part comes in, right? So for a lot of the companies, actually, anything below 7. So usually it's on a scale from 1 to 10. Anything below 10, 7 is considered a 0, which basically means that most likely that person would not recommend their service. So for example, if you were to give a 7, 8, 9, or 10, and then that would actually be on a scale of how likely people are. But then if it's less than that, it's just considered 0, because companies want to know, they're pretty strict around measuring how happy people are using the product, and how likely they are to measure um, uh, how likely people are to promote their product. It's one of the most difficult because you can't just check a database in the case of how many people actually log into your platform, right? You can easily check your database and see. You can create a SQL database back to the data analysis. You can actually create a SQL, or you can actually have a dashboard, right? That actually shows you, how many people actually signed into the application every day. But with the Net Promoter score, it's not as easy, because you need to basically create these surveys. You need to send it to people and so on. So here's an example of where the Net Promoter Score is actually really important. Think about your DSTV or your satellite or cable company, right? Usually, people don't have a lot of options with those companies. You don't have a lot of options with your cable company to go with, or which satellite company to go with, right? So you might actually see lots of views. You can actually see lots of people actually using your platform, but that doesn't mean that they're happy, right? Maybe they're just using it because they don't have a choice, right? So using user happiness metrics will actually help you better understand, in fact, how much people actually like the 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 platform. So another example of happiness could be the App Store rating, right? So if people rate it like a 5-star or 4-star, that's basically a measurement of how happy people are with your product. Another one could be number of people who have made complaints about your product. Revenue. I think this is pretty straightforward. It's a metrics that cite around how much money you're making, right? So it's really important for if your product is something that's supposed to generate lots of revenue, right? So one of the metrics could actually be LTV, which is basically lifetime value, right? So basically with LTV, you pick a time span, maybe say 1 year as a lifetime, and then you say in 1 year on average how much revenue did a customer actually generate, right? So another one could be the CCA, or cost of customer acquisition. Basically, how much money are we spending on marketing or advertising, or even how much money we're spending on the salaries of our marketing employees, right? Another one is MRR, which is monthly recurring revenue, or annual recurring revenue. Basically, how much money we're getting from all of our customers per month, right? So, say for example, if your product, you're using a licensing model, and you have 10 people sign up, and your product, when they sign up, they're actually paying $10 per month. Then you can actually understand, monthly recurring revenue, how much you're actually making from recurring revenue, which is basically someone subscribing to a product, and actually every month is recurring, and this is actually how much you're actually making from the recurring part of the business. You might also have other parts of the business that isn't reoccurring. So this is just one of the metrics you might want to look at. So basically, your team might actually only focus on one category of customers, right? So previously, I explained that one of my main products is AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, right? So I want to know how much, monthly revenue are we getting from AKS, right? We have Azure, which is a whole big platform. It has a lot of different parts, but since we have hundreds of PMs at Microsoft working on different things, I'm not responsible for the whole of Azure, right? I only care about some of the products that I take care of, right? So I might just try to focus on what the MRR is for my product. So how do you pick a good metric, right? Well, we also, one of the things you want to think about with metric is basically how they actually roll up to bigger metric, right? So you can have a small metric and how it actually rolls up to a bigger metric. So for example, let's say Facebook wants to increase the amount of time users are spending on the platform, right? So if you work for the product team responsible for comments, right? So your team only works on the comment feature of Facebook, right? You're probably not going to be spending a lot of time staring at the dashboard that shows how much time people are using on the platform. But you want to know, your team actually wants to know how many people are commenting over time. And your organization knows that the more people actually comment on Facebook, the more time on average people are actually spending on Facebook, right? So your metric could actually be to increase the number of comments, which would actually overall, increase the overall metric, which is basically to get more people spending more time on Facebook. So there's also the concept of exploratory metrics versus reporting metric. Basically, exploratory metrics are metrics that you are not always tracking, but you can do some data exploration to figure them out, right? So that's basically where the data analysis skills of the product manager actually comes in, because with the reporting metric, right, you'll probably have a data scientist or a data analyst or someone, developer, who would actually make a dashboard, and basically everyone can actually see that every month, right? But sometimes, say for example, you release a new feature or you change the color of one of the buttons on your website, you want to understand how many people are actually clicking on that button, right? So that could be an example of an exploratory metric. Again, it is a metric because it's basically a number that tells you something about your product, right? So basically you can actually do that exploration yourself. Johnson, do you want to meet yourself? Johnson. Okay. Anyways, yeah. So basically, you want to understand, like who's actually using this new, this new green button which we just added, right? So that green button, how many people clicking on the green button is probably not a reporting metric, because you probably, you're not going to make a metric for every single button on your website, right? But you might actually want to understand what is actually happening with this new feature, or this feature that you expect people to love, but no one's actually clicking on it, right? So that's basically where the exploratory metrics actually come in. So what are some of the characteristics of a really good metric? Basically, a good metric is understandable, right? So we don't want to, like I said, we don't want to track how many people are, you don't want to create a metric or create, okay, going forward, let's just assume I'm talking about reporting metric, right? So that we're focusing on reporting metrics right now. I'm not thinking about exploratory metric. So everything I'm about to say basically applies to the reporting metric, right? So again, we don't want to have a metric, which in this case, again, is a reporting metric around how many people click on a button, or who click on this button and then click on this button and click on that button, right? That is a complicated, metric to track. You want to make sure that your metrics are actually really, really easy to understand, right? We also want to use metrics, that that are rates or ratio. So here's an example of a bad metric in terms of rates or ratio, right? So a bad metric would be the number of users that have signed up to the platform. Like I said before on Facebook, Basically, imagine if your team is tracking how many people have ever signed up to Facebook. That's a bad metric, right? Instead, we want to know the rate of, for example, how many people actually signed up to Facebook last month, right? So in the case of ratio, we don't want to just want to understand, how many people. We can actually go one step further and say, instead of looking at, total number of users that have ever used your Facebook, you might actually want to see, what are the number of users that you had last month? And out of those users, how many of them actually did something on Facebook, right? So for example, how many of them actually added a new friend on Facebook? Or how many of them actually signed in at least once last month on Facebook, right? So those are some of some of the metrics that you might want to look at in terms of rating and ratio. So also, you don't want to, make false correlations, right? Here's an example of a false correlation, right? So here's one. You can actually do lots of data analysis and actually realize that as the number of people who buy ice creams increases over time, right? So as the number of people buying ice cream per month increases, also does the number of people who drown in a lake, right? So basically, obviously, there's no correlation. There's no correlation between number of people who bought ice cream and number of people who drown, right? You can't say stuff like, oh, like, okay, because those are correlated, those two numbers are actually increasing at the same time. You can't say that, oh, people are actually buying ice cream and then that is causing them to drown, or that's causing more people to drown, right? There's no connection between those two events. Basically, there's a correlation, there's something else going on. So for example, it could be that maybe it's summertime, right? More people buy ice cream in the summertime, unless, more people swim in the summertime. So if more people swim in the summertime, then obviously a number of people who died, who drowned from swimming would actually go up, right? So you want to make sure that you're not making false correlation with your metrics. So another one is, you want to make sure that good metrics are actually changeable, right? So for example, let's say your users, the type of application that you're developing, and your users are generally only able to spend 2 hours a day using your product, right? So you basically don't want to measure how much time in a day they're actually spending. So let's say your users are very busy people. Maybe you're building this high-end software that I don't know, help rocket scientists, I don't know, do the calculations a little bit faster, right? Maybe these people are very, very busy, right? You don't want to track metrics like, oh, how much time are they spending using your product, right? Instead of that, you may want to track something like how many times per week, how many times per week they're using your product, right? So these are very busy people, right? So it might not make sense to see the duration of time they're actually spending using your product, but instead actually understand how many times you're actually using your product. The more often they use your product, the more useful your product is to them, even though they're not spending, 10 hours using your product. So another example is if you own, like, say you make a website, so you make an application for a clothing store, right? Who actually buys clothes like every week, right? Who buys new clothes every week? When you're making a product like that, you don't expect people to, spend a really long time on, or maybe you don't expect people to purchase. You don't expect people to purchase new clothes very often. You don't expect your users to buy new clothes very often on your website, because people only buy clothes so often, right? But instead of that, you might actually want to measure something like how much money do they spend per purchase, right? So your team might want to maximize how much money people are actually spending on your website every time they buy stuff from your website, right? So that might be a more reasonable metric for your team to track, as opposed to, how often they're actually buying clothes on your website. So you might then decide that, okay, so I want to optimize this. And in order to optimize this, I need to make maybe the more expensive stuff more prominent on the website, or maybe, have lots of sales so that people actually buy more clothes. And at the end of the day, they're spending more money than they would if you didn't have sales, right? So good metrics are actually changeable. So how do we then, determine what good metrics are, right? So um, we actually have frameworks that can actually sometimes help you decide what metrics actually make sense, right? So in this class, I'm actually going to very briefly go over one of the pretty common frameworks that I used. But why do we actually use a framework? Basically, you know, number one, like when you think about the heart metrics in particular, it's an acronym, right? And usually when acronyms are used, it's a good metric. I'm just joking. That's not actually a thing, but basically, with the acronyms, it's actually very easy to remember the framework, which will actually make it more useful. Also, executives tend to like them, which is actually quite interesting. But anyways, metrics are actually very difficult to define. So using a framework to help you decide what metrics to use or how to define your metrics could actually be very, very useful. Also, it's a simple way to ensure that you're thinking about every aspect of the user journey, right? So in the case of the heart metric framework, right, it's basically stands for happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success, right? So how happy are your users, right? So you might want to develop some metric around how happy they are, right? How engaged are your users in the short term, right? That's basically what engagement is. Adoption, how many interested users have actually tried out your product, right? So if your website is difficult to, or your application is difficult to install or actually sign up, like if the sign up process is broken, then you would actually have this number actually go down, because even though there's lots of people who have actually clicked on your application on the App Store, not a lot of them are actually got a chance to sign in to that product, right? So retention, how many users do you retain in the long term, right? Task success, how successful are them at some of the most valuable tasks on your platform? So before I go deeper into this, let's have a 5-minute break. And then we'll continue this discussion. Okay, so we talked about the heart metric. We're gonna continue. So basically, here's an example of how to use the heart framework for my product, right? So basically, what we want to do is we want to look at basically you want to create like an Excel table that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows for each type of metric. And then you want to define what are the goals, right? What are you trying to maximize, or what are you trying to improve in your product, right? So and then you have the signals. How do you basically understand how close you are to meeting that goals? And then finally, you have the metric, which is basically the actual metric that you're trying to develop. So basically, in this example, for happiness, right? In my course, I'm trying to maximize customer satisfaction with the delivery of the AKS policy for Azure Policy for AKS learning module. That's my goal. I'm trying to make sure that as many people as possible are happy. And what are some of the signals that help me measure that is the course reading. So at the end of the course, you can actually see, let's see if I can get that up real quick. Okay, so at the end of the course, you can basically rate. Oh, actually, this one didn't ask me to rate it. But usually, actually, you know what? Oh, I don't have it because I haven't actually finished the course, but when you finish the course, it actually tells you to rate it. So that's one of them. Let's go back here. Oops. Yeah, so that's basically one of the signals and metrics that I can look at. Another one is engagement, right? Want to maximize number of people that have completed the module, right? People can actually start the module and maybe they can be like, this is too difficult or this is useless or something. We want to, in an engagement perspective, this is a metric that we want to, this is a goal that we want to achieve. And we also want to maximize number of people who rate the module, right? So not just people completing it, but also rate it, because that would then give us better idea of how well this course is actually going. Adoption, we might want to understand the maximum number of maximized number of people of customers, or Microsoft customers or AKS customers that have at least one of the employees complete the module, right? So we have all these employees, they're obviously using, AKS, using the service, they're trying to figure out how to use these policies for AKS, right? But we want to understand how many people or how many customers are actually using this module as an opportunity to learn more about to learn a little bit more about how to use this feature, right? So the signals could be, for example, maybe we can understand the network, or maybe track potentially the IP address of where people are actually taking this course from, and we might actually be able to determine which companies these people that are taking the course are actually working for, right? So the metric could basically be number of customers who have had at least one of their employees take the course in the month for the first time, right? So once one of the employees for any of these companies actually takes the course, then that counts as one, right? This might not be a very good idea because, privacy issues. But that's just an example, just for illustration purposes, and that could be an example of an adoption metric for this kind of a feature. Retention, basically, again, maximizing the number of times customers and employees log into the Learn module for reference, right? Or to train other employees in the DevOps team. So you have maybe last month, you had someone from that employee from that company actually take the course. Maybe next month, you want to increase retention in this course, right? How would you do that? You want to maybe, if the course was so great, that employee might actually go to his coworkers and be like, hey, you should probably check out this course because I just learned how to do this. Maybe, you can learn as well, right? Or maybe if the customer has a problem in the future, they can actually just log in, they can go to the page that actually describes how to solve the specific problem and actually use that to learn how to use that feature. So basically, the signal could be number of times users from the same network. Again, we're using the network, the IP address where the signals are coming from, to determine which company that person came from. And then the metric basically is a number of unique companies with the course page loads divided by the number of unique companies that we have, right? So if we have employees from 100 different success, basically, we want to, in this case, maximize the number of employees that are able to complete the exercises while taking the course. So I mentioned again what the exercises are. So basically, you actually use this sandbox. You use this, we call it a sandbox. You activate the sandbox, and you can actually write SQL code, and the thing would actually check whether or not you wrote the code properly. Right, so we want to maximize the number of people who are actually able to successfully complete the exercise. So yeah, so basically, how many people actually were able to get that check mark that we were able to validate that they were able to complete the task, that this person actually completed the exercise. So this basically just shows you how you can take, an ambiguous product, right, ambiguous feature. As you can see, it's not very, very easy to define these different metrics for a Learn module because, a Learn module is not like a lot of other features, right? So that's basically how I had to get creative. For example, using IP address to determine which company these people actually come from, and that are taking the course. So obviously, but then there's other concerns too, like for example, privacy, right? You don't want to be tracking all that kind of like some of these might not make sense. So for example, maybe we don't want more, people from the same company using the learn module too many times, because maybe that means that how many people pick one that matters or pick two that really matters. You can also use the signal column. This is really, really valuable. You can use the signals column to actually inform the engineers on tracking requirements, right? So for example, here, obviously, the engineers that are making the website for the course, they need to be able to put the feature that allows customers to actually rate the course, right? Here you probably want to understand you want to be tracking data on number of people who actually started the course, right? Obviously, this is not something that customers actually see, but maybe customers can see this one because they can actually see how many people have actually rated that course. It could actually help them decide if they want to take the course. Because if only two people have taken the course and it's a 5-star, then maybe two people is not enough to really rate that course. But this one, you might actually have to do that in the back end, right? You want to get your developers to be able to track the number of people who actually started the course, and also those who completed it. Yeah, so that's basically what the hard framework. That's basically one of the frameworks you can actually use to help you define what to track. There's other frameworks out there, like I said, but the thing about the hard is it helps you think about all these different parts of of your product, and then once you actually have all these listed out, you can then determine which one or two you actually want to be tracking. Okay, so how do we actually track these? So here are some of the tools or software you can actually use to track your metrics. For example, you can use Google Analytics or Adobe, and basically the same thing. Well, almost the same thing. Basically, they help you analyze things around your website, like the usage of your website. For example, you can actually use the Adobe Analytics for Cohort Analysis to actually see, how many people are actually continue to use your website, but also what is the flow of people using your website, right? So for example, you can actually use Adobe Analytics to see, we had 5,000 people land on your homepage, right? Out of the 5,000 people, 10, sorry, yeah, let's say 1,000 of them actually clicked on this button, right? So you can actually see that, the way most of your customers are actually using your website is they're going to the homepage, then they're clicking on this button, right? Like 10%, 20% of them are clicking on this button, and then after that, they're actually clicking on this button, and then so out of the 1,000, you have maybe 500 of them are then clicking on this button, or maybe 500 of them are spending 10 minutes on the website, or between 0 and 10 minutes, and then maybe another 500 are spending between 10 minutes and 20 minutes on the website, or maybe 100 out of the 500 out of the 1,000 are clicking on this other button. And then out of that 500, you have maybe another 100 of them then click on this button, right? So with Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics, you can actually see the flow of how people are actually using your websites. And then maybe you can actually understand where to position your adverts, for example, right? Or maybe your more expensive products, for example, right? So this can actually help you track your metrics. Crazy Egg is actually really cool. It's basically a heat map of your website of what people are actually clicking on. So basically, you have a page or a picture of what your website looks like, and then you can actually see using the heat map which areas of your website are most people interacting with, right? I also have Optimizely, which is really great for A/B testing, basically to also help you see what people are actually clicking on. And the goal basically is to help you optimize using A/B testing your website. The one that I personally use a lot is Power BI. Basically, I use Power BI to understand how some of my products are performing. Basically, I'm able to use Power BI to plug into various data sources like GitHub, right? So I want to see how many people are actually downloading my code from GitHub to help them be more successful using AKS, right? So I actually use Power BI, plug it into the data source that's connected to GitHub, and I can actually see GitHub engagement, for example, or I can actually see my tickets, right? My user stories. How many of my user stories are actually coming due really soon. That can actually, so this is not a metric, this is more on the project management side, but basically I can actually very quickly see, these are the items that are coming up due, and make sure that those items actually get completed on time. But I can also see things like how many people actually deployed my my deployment using my code to actually deploy infrastructure on Azure, right? So I actually have that being tracked on Power BI. I can also see how many people, I can connect it to another data source that shows how many people actually opened the page, right? Like maybe the first page of the Learn module that I'm developing, right? So I can actually track that using business intelligence tools like Power BI and Tableau. Okay, so now we're going to transition to another part of the course, which is basically project management for product management. Do we have any questions so far? Let's see. Let's see if stop sharing. Okay, I don't see anyone's hand up, so I'm just gonna assume that that means that people don't have any questions, or I'm explaining this perfectly. That's great. Hopefully I didn't lose you guys. Okay, so project management for product managers. I know I would expect that lots of people are really excited about this one because, sometimes product managers get confused with project managers. So basically, I talked in the first class how, as a product manager, you might be involved with some project management work, which is basically on the delivery side of the product. You want to make sure that the developers and the designers are building this product in an agile way and without waste, right? So let's just talk about a hypothetical organization, right? So any company, you can think about that. So every company, or at least most well-run companies, have a vision, right? They have a vision of what this is my purpose as an organization, right? Um, this is where we want the organization. This is what we want the organization to achieve. This is what maybe we want to do in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years, right? So within that vision, you then have goals to help you reach that vision, right? So the vision is definitely usually, well, yeah, I would say definitely defined by the executives, right? Executives of the organization basically set the vision of the organization. And then the goals usually are also determined by executives, you know, and then but some of those goals, obviously they might be measured using metrics, and those metrics might be developed in conjunction with the managers, for example, right? So basically, you have all these goals, and then you have different initiatives that your employees take on. So the different departments within the organization, they will take up different initiatives to help you achieve your goal, and then those goals will then help you achieve your vision, right? So, say for example, you can have an initiative which is basically to build the Azure policies for AKS. That is an example of an initiative, right? Um, so you can say this thing, no, sorry. An example of an initiative might be, a better example of an initiative would be Azure Policies, right? So Azure Policies basically it's a huge initiative, it's a big part of Azure, and basically it helps customers very easily and automatically have compliant and secure infrastructure on the cloud, right? And then you can have releases, which is basically a group of features that you want to release at once, right? So usually releases are tied to a specific time frame. So you can say for Q1 2021, we want to release this, and this feature, right? So let's say Q1 2021 ends in March, right? So by March, we're going to release all these features to our customers, make it available to all customers. So basically, this is the group of all the different features that we want to release at the end of March 2021. Within the releases, you can then have epics, right? So for example, an example of a release would be, okay, so for Q1 2021, we want to create Azure Policies for AKS, right? So initiative is basically Azure Policies. Releases could be these features within Azure Policies, and those features might actually be the set of features that helps you deploy Azure Policies for AKS, for example, right? And then you can, within the releases, again, releases are tied to the time. You can say, I want to release all these features at once, right? An epic is basically a logical grouping of features, or it could actually be one big feature. And then within that big feature, you have different user stories and requirements, right? So for example, you can say an epic could be an add-on, right? So maybe a simple add-on that helps you click, and actually enable Azure Policies for AKS, right? That's just one of the features of Azure Policies for AKS, but this epic basically talks about a click or a wizard-based process that will actually allow you to very easily click on a bunch of buttons, and basically you have Azure Policies for AKS activated, right? So release is the group of Azure Policies features. Epic could be one big feature that basically needs to be broken down into smaller pieces and have them spread across multiple sprints that would then be worked on as user stories and requirements. So what is an epic? Basically, an epic is product management lingo it's basically a statement of things that we are building to solve a problem, to clearly show which features and functionalities we intend to build in order to do that, right? So we learned a little. We obviously talked a little bit about this when we talked about the MVPs and wireframes and prototypes. Basically, you can have like an epic that basically says like, for example, with the Rising Star platform, one of our epics was basically to develop a CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline that helps us automate the process of releasing new features for the Rising Star platform, right? So that's an epic, right? Or it could be maybe, let's see, what was another epic we had? I'm going to cheat a little bit. Another one was probably we want students to be able to watch videos on the platform, right? So that can be an epic, right? But epic actually has a bunch of little tasks in them. For example, we want the video to be able them to be able to comment on the videos, right? Or we want them to be able to do certain things, right? So that's an example of an epic. So basically, we learned a little bit about this. Like I said before, when we were talking about MVPs and wireframes, we use these tools to help us make the right decisions in solving customer problems using features, right? So an epic is simply product management lingo for a grouping of features and functionalities that we want to build. So basically, the epics are a fundamental building block for the product team. And just to give you an example or some ideas of what the scale of an epic could be, a product team may build maybe 3 to 4 epics within a quarter, depending on the size of the company, how many resources they have, and obviously how critical that product is. So these, the epics, everything I just described might sound a lot like features, right? Like it sounds like, okay, why don't you just call it a feature? Well, that is true. It's actually a feature. Epics are actually features. But one of the reasons why we don't use the word feature is that not every epic that we build is a feature, right? So for example, I mentioned creating a CI, continuous integration, continuous delivery epic for the Rising Star platform, right? Basically, this helps our developers be more productive, and it also helps our customers because we can actually release new features more quickly as opposed to trying to, build a whole bunch of stuff and then release it using a traditional release process, right? But that is not a feature that customers actually see, right? It's something that our team actually has to work on. It's a feature to us, but it's not a feature to customers. So that's basically why we just use the word epics. And also, basically an epic. So for example, an example of an epic could be like, releasing the initial version of Instagram stories, which is basically the example that I was talking about before. Obviously, after the Instagram stories was released, they continued working on it, but an epic could basically be that, for example. Usually an epic is usually bigger than, it's like a major feature. Usually takes more than 1 sprint to build. If it takes less than a sprint to build, then maybe that should be a user story instead. And then we're going to talk a little bit about epic spec, which is basically how we can define what we want to do within that epic. Okay, so basically, what is an epic spec sheet? So epics usually have a documentation that describes basically what we are building and why. This document is called an epic spec or a requirements document, and basically, it could be, you can, however you write it, depends on different companies. It doesn't really matter what tool you use, but the basic idea is a really well-written, well-thought-out documentation that describes what you want to achieve within that epic, right? So usually this spec sheet would actually include, four sections. You have the introduction, you have the product requirements, you have the design requirements, and you have the engineering requirements, right? So basically, the introduction is definition of what that feature is, or what it is that you're building, who are you building it for, and why are you building it. Don't forget, the answer to the question why is extremely important in product management, and you want to continue to make sure that your why actually makes sense. Otherwise, maybe you need to pivot, right? If that why doesn't make sense anymore. You may also talk about, again, who it's for, maybe provide links to further documentation of this epic, what you're trying to do and why. You might also have legal plans, right? To make sure that everything is good from a legal perspective. You might also have marketing plan, like, once the epic is released, this is how we want to market it, etc. Right? So having a lot of this information upfront really helps your product be more successful. You might also, in the introduction, define what you might also like attach the MVP, maybe the result of the MVP experiment that you did, or like, what the ideal state of the product would look like, right? So with the Epic spec, you can actually describe what the full product will look like, as opposed and how that compares with, what the MVP will look like, or what the second version would look like, right? And so those are some of the things you want to put in your Epic sheet. In terms of the product requirements, you basically want to dig deeper into what is required, right? So for example, an example of what might go into the product requirement could be, I expect this feature when it's built to be fast. So for example, you can say, I want the page to load up in 20 microseconds, right? So those are basically the product requirements. You might also say stuff like, I want it to be available in these different languages, right? You might also say you want it to generate a certain type of data, right? So for example, I talk about the learning module. I want the learning module to be able to generate, help me understand how many people started the course, right? Design requirements, basically, so the introduction and the product requirements is basically usually done by the product manager. The design requirements is filled by, both the designer and the product manager, but, mostly done by the designer. And this is basically where you put the wireframe, the high fidelity prototype, etc. Basically, anything that from a design perspective describes what the product should do. Right? And then you have the engineering requirements, which is mostly filled out by the engineers, after you've actually discussed, the product and the design requirements to them. So basically that comes after the other two, right? So, for example, they would actually talk about, the database that they need to be able to support this new feature. They might talk about the API requirements or anything else that needs to be done from a technology perspective to support the new software. So for example, you might want to add to your engineering requirements, to develop an API's endpoint to get a certain high resolution picture, stated in the design, right? So in the design spec, you said, this feature would actually allow you to show high resolution picture. You might have to develop an API to help make that actually happen. Right? Or maybe you can say that you need to enable another team, right? Maybe another team that works for Instagram stories. You might want to build an API that will actually help them do other features to make what you're building, your Epic, better integrate with Instagram, for example, the overall Instagram application. Okay, so it's important that the Epic spec sheet is available to everyone, everyone in the team, right? That's one of the big advantages of the Epic spec sheet is you want to define all these things, right? And make it available to everyone in the team so that everyone understands what the team is working on and why they're actually doing those things, so that, they don't come to you 10,000 times asking you the same, like different people coming to you asking the same question. They can just go to the Epic spec sheet and actually understand what's actually going on. Okay, so what are user stories and acceptance criteria? So basically, user story is a way of defining what we want to build, right? So user story is basically a way of describing what we're trying to build. Usually the way user stories are written is that you say stuff like, I say dash, I want to do dash so that I can dash, right? So that's one example of how you can write user stories. I'll explain why we write it that way in a second, but basically that's the structure that you use for user stories. Another example of how you might write it could be when I am dash, I want to be able to do dash so that dash, right? So for example, an example for that could be with, let's see, with Uber, you can say when I am waiting for my driver, and maybe something else comes up, I would like to be able to cancel my Uber so that I don't get charged the full amount, um, you know, for the trip, for example, right? So that's another way of defining user stories. So I just talked about two different ways of defining it. Um, as we all know, product managers are responsible for defining what should be built and why, and developers are responsible for developing the how, right? So that is basically why we write user stories that way. Because as you can imagine, this is kind of a weird way of writing, like writing a feature, right? So for example, if in my project that I'm working on, I can say an example of a user story could be, as a user, I would like to be able to find courses on Azure Policies for AKS so that I can learn how to use it properly and secure the cluster, right? So let me just repeat that for a second. As a user or as a customer, I would like to be able to find the course on Azure Policies for AKS so that I can learn how to use it properly and secure my AKS cluster. Basically, I'm writing it this way so we can avoid, stating to the developers exactly how to do it, because it's their job to figure out how to do it, right? So when I just talk from a user perspective, what I want to be able to do, which is basically to be able to find the course. If no one can find the course, obviously no one's going to take the course, right? So by defining it this way, you're not telling them how to do it. You're just telling them what to do it. But before we actually send off this user story to the developers, with a definition of, basically the user story and also maybe detailed description of what you're trying to get them to do. We might also want to provide an acceptance criteria, right? An acceptance criteria is a list of conditions that a software must satisfy to be considered complete, right? It's usually written in a ticket or, for example, an example of an acceptance criteria for the example that I provided earlier could be like, given that I am a user and I type I type AKS policies within the search bar in Microsoft Learn and hit enter, then I am presented with a list of relevant courses around AKS, and the Azure policy for AKS course should be one of the top 3 courses listed, right? So that's an example of how to write an acceptance criteria. Basically, how do we test, or how do I intend to test whether or not the developers have actually built this feature the way I expect them to? So again, I'm just going to repeat it. Given that I am a user and I type AKS policy within the search bar in Microsoft Learn and hit enter, I'm presented with a list of relevant courses around AKS, and the Azure policy for AKS course should be one of the top 3 courses listed. So how would I test it? Basically, I would just go to, Microsoft Learn, and then I would search for it, right? So I can say Azure AKS policy, right? And then I expect that that course should be one of the top 3, basically. Obviously, I haven't built the course yet, so it's not going to be here, but this is just talking about other courses for AKS. Okay, so back to our slide. Okay, so another one could be, given that I am a user. So this is basically the second part of the previous acceptance criteria that I mentioned. So it goes like this. Given that I am a user that has found the AKS policy, sorry, that has found the Azure policy for AKS course by searching or using the filters on, the learning portal, I should be able to click on the link that corresponds to the course, which would take me to the introductory page of the course, right? So after they're able to find it, they're able to search for it, and the course has been ranked high enough to find that course, then I want to be able to click on that and actually take me to the course, right? So giving me that I'm a user that has found the Azure policy for AKS course by searching or by using the filter on Microsoft Learn, I should be able to click on the link that corresponds to the course, which will take me to the introductory page of the course. So let me see if I think this is one example. So if you click here, basically you want to be able to find the course. This is basically introduction of the course. So that's basically an example of how to define acceptance criteria. And you probably noticed that this sounds very specific, right? Well, the goal of the acceptance criteria is to be specific so that it provides a list of things that you would actually use to test to make sure that it works before you release it to the public. So now let's talk a little bit about. Let me show you a little bit how user stories actually look in practice. So I'm going to show you one of the project management tools. There are multiple tools for writing user stories. So here we had, I talked about, we basically use cards to write these stories, right? These cards are generally called tickets. I'll show you that in a second. And we also use Jira. So this is the cards. And then we also use, some of the tools that we use include Jira or Azure DevOps. So, at Microsoft, I use Azure DevOps for, obviously, I can't really show that because, confidential information. But I use Jira for the Blackman's Rising Star platform. So I'll just show you what that looks like. Let's see. That's that. Okay. Okay, so this is basically what the user story tickets look like. This is basically what Jira looks like. There's lots of different things you can look at. Like for example, you look at a roadmap, you can look at the backlog. Basically, the backlog is all the things that you're planning to build. In this case, basically in this case, I have all these user stories that I've written. But basically within this sprint, which is basically sprint 8 in this case, these are the items that I actually have active, and backlog, these are the things that don't belong to that sprint. So if I was to go back to my board, oops, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay. Time number. Or I can just go to the board. That's fine. Active sprint. Okay, Jira. Let's do this, guys. Okay, so this is basically what my board looks like. I think I mentioned earlier in the previous class that you might have these boards like this for project management of software development projects. So for example, I mentioned something about the CI/CD and automated testing. Basically, this is basically one of my epics, right? So if I click here, you can actually see the epic. Oops. That was not the epic. Let's see, epic link. That is the epic. Okay, so I guess that's the epic. Actually, you know what? I think the card. So, but anyways, this is basically the epic around page refreshes. We want to make sure that obviously users are having a good experience. But basically, this is what a board can look like. You have different stories as a mentor. So in this example, we have different personas. We have mentors and we have mentees. So as a mentor, I would like to select my degree from the list of options so that I don't feel, I don't know, I guess that should be feel left out when I sign up. So if you have a mentor who signed up and the degree isn't listed, then they're not gonna be happy, right? Are you trying to say my degree doesn't matter? Nobody likes that. So basically, under the user story, you can actually have tasks. So in this case, you have design the degree section for the menu overlay. Basically, the menu overlay is basically that, or if you are using a mobile phone, this is basically the menu overlay. So you want to be able to, sorry. Basically, you want to design it, and then you want to build it, right? So you can have a subtask around, so for example, finish, blah, blah, blah. Want to determine, these are the little things, steps that need to be completed, subtasks to finish up this user story. Let's see, let me show you an example. Let me actually open this up so you actually see what a user story looks like when you open it. So basically you have, as a mentor, when I respond to questions, I would like my text area to look different from student area. So basically you want the mentor user experience to be different from the user experience so that it can easily be identified by all users that it's a mentor that said this as opposed to a student, right? So my acceptance criteria is that given that I'm using a mentor profile, when I hit the reply button in a comment in videos, type in a comment, I hit reply, my comment should be submitted in a tab that indicates that I'm a mentor. Basically, when they, let's see if I can show that real quick. Maybe that's not a good example. Let's try this one. Oops, no comments on this one. Okay, let's see this one. Nope. Okay, we're gonna go back to the first one. Basically, you want to be able to show. Oops, there's no response on this one, but I guess there's two responses on this one. You want to make it so that if it's actually a mentor that commented, it looks a little bit different. So students who have asked a question can actually very quickly see that this question is being answered by a mentor as opposed to other people just giving comments, right? So that's just an example of what a project management software for software products could actually look like. That's basically Jira. Azure DevOps is pretty similar to that as well. Okay, so like let's head back to this. Yeah, so Azure DevOps is pretty similar to that as well. Okay, so that was the Jira demo. Let's talk about estimations and velocity. Okay. In the waterfall project management paradigm, you basically want to define a project. You want to have the project charter, and you want to understand maybe things like how long is it going to take to complete the project, define that, what is going to be in the project, how much is it going to cost, right? So you want to make sure that you have some idea of how long it would take to develop that product. The problem is that almost all the time, those estimates are not true, right? Like it's just fact. If you look at the data, basically every project estimate is always wrong. That's just how it is. You can imagine with software development projects, basically you have a bunch of developers building a software, and you don't even know how are you supposed to know how long it would take to build that software when you don't even know what the user needs are. You're not even sure if the results of your MVP test would actually be successful. You don't know if maybe you would have to go back to the drawing board multiple times until you have a user experience that actually works for customers. It's very difficult to do that, right? So that's basically why we use agile product management for software development, because it allows us to be flexible and doesn't, impose very hard rules on, what we can do. So for example, imagine if you're a car mechanic and, sorry, let's say you take your car to a mechanic and they say your car is a mechanic. Sorry, let's say your car is a BMW, right? Your car is a BMW and this mechanic that you're taking it to is a BMW mechanic, right? Odds are that he's done this before because he's a BMW mechanic, right? Maybe he's done it 1,000 times. So he already knows exactly how long it would take. You can say stuff like, oh, it's going to take me, 6 hours to do this based on my experience, right? Now, imagine if everyone in the world had a different type of car. Our mechanics are not specified, they're not specialized by brand, right? So if you were to bring your car to a mechanic, do you think they can give you an estimate of how long it would take to fix it? The answer is no, because they haven't seen your car before. If they give you an estimate, then that estimate is probably going to be wrong. And what they will probably end up doing is they might just give you a conservative estimate, and they might just say, you know what, just give us a week, we'll have your car fixed, right? So software engineering is the same. Companies are building different types of software. Even if you worked on that software, maybe last week, it's possible that for other engineers have actually made changes to your software. Maybe the direction of that software has actually changed since you last worked on it, right? So it's very difficult to estimate it. This is basically where the concept of estimations and velocity in lean product management actually comes in. So basically, a velocity is, okay, so I mentioned user stories, right? I showed you an example of user stories, right? So what usually happens in software development is you would then assign story points to each user story, right? So for example, here, see, so here I don't actually have a story point, but I can say story point here is 1, right? So basically, story point of 1 basically means that this task is very, very easy to do. You can use like story points like let's see, let's just go back to the slide. You can use stuff like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as your story points, and or you can use stuff like Fibonacci numbers. Like for example, it can be 1, 2, 3, 5, and it goes up like that. Or you can use stuff like 1, 3, 10. Basically, different ways to estimate how complex a task is, right? So you can say like a very difficult task would be like 10 story points, and the easiest task would be 1 story point, for example, right? It's just a way of estimating, how long it would take to develop a specific task, right? So where does the velocity come in? Basically, the velocity is the amount of story points your team is able to develop within 1 sprint. So say, for example, you're using the Scrum process and your sprint lasts 2 weeks, you can actually use velocity to see, okay, so last sprint, we were able to complete 50 story points. The sprint before that, we were able to finish 45 story points, right? So using that, you can then determine, you want to do that across multiple sprints, like maybe 10 different sprints, and then have the average to have a better understanding of, the velocity of your team. So basically, yeah, so how many were they able to complete? That's basically total story point value. So you want to do this over many sprints to get, and then get an average. Okay, so that's basically how to estimate, how long it takes to complete certain features. Because if you're able to put all the story points for all the features, then you can then determine how long or how many sprints will be required to complete it using the velocity. Okay, so road mapping, basically, I'm not going to show you an example of road mapping in this case because, every company does it very differently. But one thing you should know about roadmaps is basically they are always inaccurate. That's just the fact. It's basically not possible to have a really really accurate roadmap because with Agile you're supposed to change or adapt to signals you're getting from external factors like your customers, right? So if your roadmap is actually accurate, then you are not implementing Agile. That's just a fact, right? So the whole point of Agile is that you can say, this is important, an important user problem, and we need to solve it, right? And we may solve it now with this initiative, or maybe it might be done with a different initiative, or maybe our business would actually change, in the future and actually decide not to develop this feature, right? So if you see a roadmap that says, Q1 we're doing this, Q2 we're doing this, Q3 we're doing this, Q4 and we were doing this, then basically, you know that it's probably not going to be exactly accurate, but it's kind of still useful to have a general guide. But again, it probably wouldn't be accurate. So now you're probably asking, why do we do this, right? Basically, executives and investors like to see that, right? Like, they like to see the roadmaps. But the really good ones would actually know it's really impossible to forecast, more than 3 quarters into the future, right? So they would know that you may have, a bunch of user tests and, move stuff back, maybe make some changes, or it may just be that the feature doesn't, it's not a problem anymore, right? It becomes a non-problem. So like, say, for example, you needed to build a new feature to compete with another company, but that company goes, exits the market, or that company is no longer a competitor, then basically you're not going to build that feature anymore, right? That's basically where the Agile thing comes in. So the second reason why we do it is sometimes we actually get held to a deadline, especially in the case of business-to-business companies, like the type of products that I work on. We have these customers that need these features, right? They need these features. These companies that need, for example, this new feature with AKS. It's really important for us to have some kind of roadmap so that they will have an idea of when that feature would arrive, so that they can then plan their development teams to take advantage of that feature and understand how long they will need to maybe use a workaround to get the work done until that feature actually comes in. So once you commit to your customers, you basically, you have that roadmap and you want to try really, really hard not to change that roadmap, basically. So instead of using, specific defined roadmaps saying we're going to do this this month, next month, the month after, basically forecasting, 2 years into the future, what do we want to do instead, right? Well, you can basically just sort things into priorities, right? And then you can say, these are the things we want to do in our near term, these are the things we want to do in our midterm, and these are the things that we want to do in our long term, right? So basically, it's just a rough estimate of what we're trying to do, over the midterm, the near term, and the long term. And basically, that should usually be good enough for some executives. But in general, those things will probably not be very accurate. Okay, so basically, okay, so we talked about how it's very difficult to forecast in the future exactly when certain things will be done, especially 3 quarters into the future. For example, depending on the company, it might actually be the next quarter. You might not know what you're going to be doing, right? So basically, how do you then prioritize all these different things that you need to do? Well, basically, you want to, just use your knowledge, use your best judgment, use your experience to help you prioritize. You might also get some signals. For example, a business-to-business PM like me, I might just look at, what are the things that are blocking the most amount of customers, right? Which feature do most of the customers actually need? Actually, prioritize based on that, or how much money would we start making or increase if we were to build these features, right? So there's lots of different things you can do, but in general, there's some methods that might actually help you, if you're stuck basically on determining how to prioritize. So for example, sorry, just check the time. Okay, so for example, you might have assumption testing, which is basically you're trying to do things to help you, like we said during the MVP stage, help you de-risk your assumptions, right? De-risk your project. So maybe you want to determine, okay, so which one? So the first one was the risk, right? How much are we not sure that this thing is actually a true assumption? And then the importance, how important is it that this assumption is actually true? So you have that from 1 to 10, you can actually add, those two scores together and then sort based on that, right? So that's the assumption-based testing for prioritization. You can also use the BUG method, which is basically an acronym. Like I said before, acronyms are awesome and executives love them. So basically, you want to define the business benefits, the user benefits, the cost, and maybe some of yeah. So basically those three things you want to look at is actually BUC, not BUG. But it can be quite challenging because it's very difficult to rate the business benefits on a scale from 1 to 10 or the user benefit from 1 to 10, right? And also the cost. You don't always know how long it would take to develop a feature. You can also use the Mps Score method, which is basically must, could, should, would. You take all of your features and basically figure out which ones you must do, right? If you don't do this, your whole product is useless, right? Or the ones that we probably should do, right? So basically group them into those four buckets and determine what you need to do. Okay, so basically, that is all on project management. For product management, we're going to move on to the last part of this course. I know we're a little bit out of time, but basically, I want to define why it's important to understand technology, right? You need to understand technology even if you don't code, right? You know, and some of the reasons why is you need to be able to understand what can really realistically be built, right? If you understand technology, you probably don't have to spend as much time asking engineers what's possible, right? Imagine if you have an idea, every time you sit with your designer, you have to run back to the developers and ask them, is this possible? Is this possible? Right? You won't have to, when you're talking to executives and they ask you if you can do this, you won't have to tell them, oh, let me go check with the engineers first before I let you know, because you already know, right? So that's one of the reasons. Another one could be, it helps you have a better relationship with engineers, because if you understand the amount of work and the nuances of what you're asking them to do, they will probably have more respect for you. Also, it also helps you understand the impact of the feature that you're trying to build, right? So for example, if you're working with a designer and the designer's like, oh, I think it'll be awesome if we had this button here, this way. And when you click it, it actually does this. So we can skip a whole bunch of steps. Well, guess what? If you don't know what the impact of that feature is, maybe that feature requires you to build a new database, for example, maybe a new caching database to make it a little bit faster. If you don't know the implication of that, you might just say yes, 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 yes. And then you're going to go talk to developers and they're going to be like, okay, well, that's going to take us like 6 months to build, right? So understanding technology is very important for product managers. So I just wanted to quickly talk about some of the important things to know as a product manager. You don't need to know how to code, but there's certain things you need to know. For example, you need to know what a cloud is, right? What is the cloud? Basically, it's the internet, right? It's kind of, to some extent, you can say it's a buzzword that some really smart marketing teams actually came up with to basically say the same thing that we've been doing for the past, even before the word cloud came out. Yeah, that's basically what a cloud is. The cloud is the internet. But usually when people say cloud, they're actually talking about the subset of that, which is basically using someone else's computer to get something done. So in the past, you probably had to, to host a website, you needed to buy your own web servers and store them in your data where in your data center, and actually then host your applications on that, right? But now with the cloud, you can actually host them on someone else's computer. For example, Azure, you can actually use Azure Microsoft's computers to actually run your workloads as opposed to having um, to buy your own servers as well. Okay, so that's the cloud. Basically, you need to understand the inner workings of the internet. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to go over this today because we're basically out of time. But you need to be able to understand these concepts. You have the client. What happens when you type something to your computer? How the address gets translated to using the DNS to an IP address, and then how the web server basically figures out what page to return to you and then returns that. So, you also want to understand stuff around like front end, back end, tech stack. Basically, the front end is just a fancy name for what users see and interact with. This includes the colors, the text, it consists of HTML, CSS, JavaScript in the context of, the front end of a website. You can think of the HTML as the structure. You can think of the website and the content, the actual words on the website. You can think of CSS as the styling. How do we want to structure the text? The colors, the styling. And then you can think of JavaScript basically as the interactivity of the web page. For example, when I click on this button, the page does this, right? It looks a little bit different. That's basically JavaScript, right? So there's lots of, these items. I would suggest you take some time to do some research and understand what they are. As a product manager, it's really important. Also, what is an API? You need to be able to, explain what an API is, understand why we have APIs and public versus private APIs. Putting it all together, you want to learn about, various frameworks. You want to learn about query languages like SQL. So that was mentioned at the beginning of this class that there's going to be a data analysis course after this. So that might be a good opportunity for you to learn SQL. You might also want to check out some data analysis languages like Python, right? You don't have to learn how to program, but if you have some time, that might be like a good thing to learn. You also want to learn about databases, how the databases work, right? So basically, thank you for taking the course. This is basically the end of the course. Some of this is just an introduction. Lots of people in this course coming from different backgrounds. You might want to, there's a lot of things that I covered, but there's only so much you can cover in 9 hours about product management. There's a lot. I try to focus on the most important things and the things that are more specific to product management. But there are other things you might want to learn to make you a better product manager, right? So for example, how to be better at, understanding market, doing competitive market analysis, or being better at customer development. How do you want to groom your customers? Get them, find people to do user research on, actually conduct the user research and actually keep them engaged through that process, how to thank them, all that kind of stuff. You want to learn about, how to work with different stakeholders, how to work with developers, how to work with designers. It's quite different the way you would work with them. You also want to, learn how to prepare yourself for the job, right? You can look at job postings and see, which is some of the requirements that are required. You want to learn how to look for jobs, right? There's different, places where jobs are posted, like LinkedIn. You can go on the company's website. You also want to learn what to do. So basically, this course focuses on what to do when you get the job, but there might be some other stuff that you want to do at the very beginning. So that's basically it. Thank you for listening to me ramble. For the last 3 classes. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. Yeah. So if you have any questions, just forward it to STEMHub team, and hopefully maybe they can get me to answer them. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to do?
Thank you.
Doctor. Okay.
Thank you, Ayo. I sent a message in the chat, but I don't think you've seen it. So I was asking if there are like some sort of certifications to become a product manager. If there are, can you like share the link or the names that we should look out for?
Yeah,
Then,
so there's a, sorry,
okay.
okay, let me answer that one quickly. Basically, there's a few. You can probably take like a certified Scrum Master certificate. Sorry, I'm actually not very familiar with that the certificates about product management because different companies have different requirements, right? So I'm not actually very familiar with different certifications, but there's quite a few of them. You can actually do a Google search to find them. One of the really important skills of being a product manager is being able to do research. So you can actually go on Google and figure out which ones are really useful. For me, I came from a bit of development background and also PMP. I had my PMP certification. So like those helped me as well from the project management perspective. I also had some practical work experience building products. But in terms of certifications, you might just Google that and see what's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Then secondly, how can one show some transferable skills if switching from, say, DevOps engineer or infrastructure role to PM role? Like you
Yes.
mentioned, you were a developer before now. So
Yeah.
how easy was it to switch, and were you able to get a job as a product manager immediately, or it took some time?
Yes, it definitely takes some time. Basically, this course, I went over those skills that you need, and none of the things that I mentioned had to do with programming skills, except
Yeah.
maybe at the end. So those things that I just taught you, those are some of the things you need to learn to improve your skills as a product manager, if you already have the developer experience. So in my case, I basically had experience building products as a product manager, and that's, obviously my previous experience also helped my transferable skills. So for example, working as a data scientist, being able to understand data is a very important skill. So I would say a software developer, because you already know how to build software, you would have certain advantages that would help you be a better product manager. So you just need to focus on the other parts of product management, which is the business side and the user experience side.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any more questions? You can unmute yourself now. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to, thank you for this wonderful session. Always, informative and engaging. And I guess Dr. Reddy is here, so I was just, about to close the room, but I'll hand it over to Dr. Reddy. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dushan. Aya, thank you so much for these 3 wonderful sessions. They were really enlightening for us. Thank you for taking time to walk us through this process. A lot of us will go out from here really actually trying this out on our own and navigating. I would like to connect with Aya. If you'd like to connect with Aya on LinkedIn, please, I'd like you to find him out there and be able to connect with him. To know what is up to career-wise, and also to understand what is going with the not-for-profit that is now something that I am looking forward to talking to him about. Hayo, we appreciate you a lot. Some of you are still on here. We really do appreciate you staying with us for the 3 Saturdays. We hope that through this program, you have gotten some knowledge. You've gotten something that can help you, whether you want to transition into product management or you want to just add this to your portfolio. We hope that this will provide that pathway for you. From next week, we will start our data analytics class. Previously, I had added the link to it to the comment section here. I will drop it again for anyone who is interested in really participating. We want you to come back and learn how to optimize your own presentation skills. How do I make sure my data makes sense to my audience a lot more? Please join that class to be able to learn over a 3-week period as well. We don't just want to give you a 1 class, you just learn the basics and go. We want to make sure that you have enough information. Aya, can you provide your LinkedIn profile so people can follow you? And we want your testimonials. As we told you previously, this program is sponsored by the government of Canada. We want them to be able to know how this program went with you. Please help us fill out our testimonials, a sheet that we dropped. Please, my colleague told me nobody has filled out the testimonial sheet, and he was wondering nobody has filled out the survey. We will provide a survey response to Aya. If Ayo has truly blessed you in this last 3 weeks, please, for God's sake, fill out these two instruments that we're going to use, the survey and also the testimonials that we can use to show our funders how things had gone with us. Again, we thank you so much for being a part of this wonderful opportunity. We hope that you continue to follow our journey on social media as we bring different things to you, courtesy of hardworking individuals like yourself who just want to give back to their community. Always remember, when we're thinking about advancing STEM education, when we're thinking about Black Lives Matter, when we're thinking about the injustice done to the Aboriginal community, when we're thinking about all of that, it is us who can rectify that. It is us who can correct that. And it is by coming together, standing up, contributing to courses like this, that we can make sure that our children will not experience that in these countries. And right now, we're able to open our programs to people abroad. And we hope that through this, Canada has touched you, as this program is sponsored by our government. We hope that you continue to fight for justice wherever you are. We hope that you continue to help us advance STEM education wherever you are. We hope that when you see another minority trying to climb the ladder, that this helps you and inspire you to say, I want to offer a support. I want to check on that person. I want to hold the hand of somebody else. You don't have to. But what will it cost you to do that? That's why we are here, showing and leading by example. Again, thank you, Ayo, for your time today. Thank you, Dashan, my colleague who stayed here so that we can close this program. And we wish you good luck in your career. And as we said, if you're interested to continue this week on another 3 week with us, I think it's going to be a wild ride on that data analytics. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And this is goodbye. Thank you.